It's over for Caitlin Clark in Indiana, and I think they're moving her to Los Angeles.
The Indiana Fever entered the 2026 WNBA season carrying genuine championship expectations. They had come within one game of the WNBA Finals in 2025, finishing a strong playoff run without their best player on the floor. Caitlin Clark had appeared in just 13 of the team's 40 regular season games that year, sidelined by a sequence of soft tissue injuries that included 2 separate quad strains, dual groin issues, and a bone bruise in her left ankle discovered during a rehabilitation workout in August. Despite missing the entire postseason, Clark still earned an All-Star selection, a reflection of what she means to the league even in her physical absence. When the 2026 season opened, Clark was healthy and she showed it immediately. Through her first 8 games, she was averaging 20.1 points and 8.1 assists per contest, production that placed her among the elite playmakers in the league. The franchise appeared positioned to translate its 2025 momentum into a legitimate title run. Within weeks, however, a sequence of events began to erode that optimism, and the fallout has reached well beyond the confines of Gainbridge Fieldhouse. The first significant flashpoint came on May 20, when the Fever announced less than 2 hours before tip-off that Clark would not play against the Portland Fire due to back soreness. What made the situation notable was not the scratch itself, but the messaging around it. Clark had not appeared on the team's injury report prior to that announcement. Under WNBA rules, teams are required to report player injuries, illnesses, and absences, along with their participation status, by 5 p.m. local time the day before all games. The league responded by issuing a formal warning to the franchise. What compounded the problem was the contradiction in the organization's own statements. Ahead of that game, Coach Stephanie White told reporters Clark was healthy and the team was not managing anything. Hours later, Clark was out. The disconnect between those two positions drew immediate attention from fans and media observers who had already spent most of 2025 watching the franchise navigate Clark's availability with a degree of opacity that had worn thin. The organizational response to outside scrutiny made things considerably worse. The Fever revoked media credentials for longtime independent reporter Scott Agnes, citing inaccurate and unsubstantiated information concerning his coverage of the late lineup scratch. Agnes, who operates the Substack newsletter Fieldhouse Files, had covered the Fever since 2012, longer than any beat reporter in Indianapolis. His original report stated that Clark's absence was part of a strategic management plan for the season, information he attributed to a trusted source. The following day, the franchise sent him an email terminating his media access entirely. The decision drew swift criticism from media organizations and renewed pointed questions about how this franchise handles information surrounding its most important player. For a reporter who had attended every Fever training camp practice and home game across multiple seasons, the revocation carried real professional consequences. His ability to provide meaningful coverage to a paying audience depends on direct access. By removing that access, the Fever severed the most established independent journalistic relationship they had with their local market. The move drew comparisons to a broader pattern of information management around Clark's physical condition. During the 2025 season, the full scope of her injuries was not disclosed in real time. An additional ankle injury, suffered during a rehabilitation workout in August of that year, was confirmed only later by insiders, adding to a list that already included 2 quad injuries, 2 groin injuries, and a bone bruise. Clark addressed the 2025 situation in a public statement when she was ruled out for the remainder of that season, writing that disappointed was not a large enough word to describe how she was feeling, and that she had spent hours in the gym every day with the singular goal of getting back on the floor. The franchise's decision to post a job listing for a new training staff director in the weeks following the 2025 season did not go unnoticed. Some fans had expressed frustration with the team's medical personnel during that year, largely because of how frequently Clark's soft tissue problems recurred. Whether staffing changes at that level can account for the pattern of injuries is a separate question from whether the team communicated those injuries transparently as they developed. On the latter point, the organizational record has not been easy to defend. Into this environment came the most consequential on-court incident of the young 2026 season. Indiana was hosting the Portland Fire, an expansion franchise, as a heavy favorite. With 6:30 remaining in the first quarter and the Fever leading, White removed Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Lexi Hull from the game simultaneously. Indiana proceeded to collapse. By the time the quarter ended, Portland led 29-15. The final score was 100-84, a loss that compounded an earlier road defeat to the Golden State Valkyries, a 2-game slide during which Clark's defensive vulnerabilities had been exploited by both opponents to significant effect. During the second quarter of the Portland game, Clark and White engaged in a visible sideline confrontation. Clark initially sat on the bench without responding. sipping water and avoiding eye contact while White spoke to her directly. After a few moments, Clark did respond, raising her hands in an animated exchange with her head coach. White then removed Clark from the game in favor of rookie Raven Johnson. Clark returned to the floor roughly 2.5 minutes later, but the moment had already circulated far beyond the arena. The footage accumulated more than 400,000 views in under 3 hours. White addressed the situation after the game. She characterized the first quarter substitution as routine workload management and described the overall decisions as nothing out of the ordinary. That explanation did not absorb the criticism directed at the franchise. Indiana had been leading when she pulled 3 starters, and the team fell apart in the minutes that followed. For a fan base that entered the season expecting a championship run, watching an expansion team dismantle the Fever by 16 points in that context produced significant frustration.
Lexi Hall addressed the sideline incident publicly, describing it as an in-the-moment occurrence that had not carried over into the locker room or practice environment afterward. Her framing positioned the exchange as ordinary competitive friction between a player and a coach, the kind of moment that happens regularly in professional basketball and carries little lasting significance. The challenge for Indiana is that nothing about the current moment reads as ordinary. Every decision made by the coaching staff and front office is being processed through a larger narrative about organizational competence, and that narrative has been built from real events on the record. The relationship between White and Clark had been widely characterized as a genuine and productive one through most of 2025. There had been considerable interest around how the two would develop a working dynamic, particularly given the questions that had surrounded Clark's relationship with her previous head coach during the 2024 rookie season. By most accounts, the bond between Clark and White strengthened through the injury-shortened 2025 campaign. Both spoke about each other with evident mutual respect when addressing the media. That foundation has not been publicly repudiated by either party in 2026. But the Portland incident, combined with the organizational turbulence around it, has made it considerably harder for the franchise to project stability.
Sports analyst and media personality Rachel Demita did not mince words in response to the injury reporting episode. Speaking on her podcast, Demita said she did not know if Caitlin staying with the Indiana Fever made sense. She framed the situation in comparative terms, arguing that if this were an NBA franchise, people would have already been fired. She identified Clark as the face of the league and a star player who had never previously experienced significant injuries, and said that in any other major professional league, somebody in the organization would have been held accountable by this point. Demita later clarified that she had not intended to call for specific firings, but maintained that the injury reporting situation had not been managed with the level of care and transparency that a player of Clark's standing deserves. Demita also raised a separate concern about team identity. She questioned whether Indiana had established a clear on-court leader, noting that Clark had occupied a more prominent leadership role during her 2024 rookie season than she appears to hold in 2026.
That observation does not reflect a deficiency in Clark's competitive capacity. She was averaging close to 24 points and 9 assists through her first 5 games of the current season. The production is there. The concern is structural. Whether the organization has built an environment around her that consistently reinforces her centrality to how the team operates and communicates. The trade speculation that followed should be understood as a symptom of that broader institutional doubt rather than credible reporting about imminent transactions. Two-time NBA champion Mychal Thompson posted publicly that he was hearing from a reliable source that the Fever no longer wanted Clark, and called on the Los Angeles Sparks to pursue her immediately. Former Fox Sports host Jason Whitlock went further, declaring that the Fever were planning to trade Clark to Los Angeles and predicting a coaching overhaul there to accommodate her arrival. No credible WNBA reporter confirmed any aspect of those claims. Clark herself addressed the speculation directly, stating that the sky is not falling and reaffirming her commitment to Indiana. Separately, unverified reports have circulated suggesting that the New York Liberty and Las Vegas Aces have monitored Clark's situation with interest. None of those reports have been confirmed by sources with direct knowledge of trade discussions. The Fever retain full contractual control over Clark's rights. Clark has acknowledged publicly that she is not signed to a long-term deal, a remark that has been interpreted as a signal in some quarters, though she has not characterized it as a threat to leave. What the volume of speculation reflects, regardless of its accuracy, is a level of institutional anxiety around this franchise that did not exist at this intensity 12 months ago. Indiana spent the offseason positioning itself as a legitimate championship contender. Clark returned healthy and productive.
The roster was constructed with intent. The baseline conditions for a deep run were present, and yet within the first weeks of the regular season, the organization had collected a league warning for injury protocol violations, revoked the credentials of its longest-tenured beat reporter,
watched its franchise player engage in a viral sideline confrontation with its head coach during a blowout loss to an expansion team, and become the subject of trade speculation that generated millions of impressions across social media platforms. The common thread running through each of these episodes is not resource limitation or competitive disadvantage. The Fever are not a poorly funded franchise operating on the margins of the league. They operate in an era of historically significant commercial growth for women's basketball, and Caitlin Clark is the single most commercially significant player driving that growth. The issue is one of management and communication, the gap between the standard a franchise of this visibility is held to and the operational transparency it has demonstrated.
Clark has not publicly requested a trade. She has not publicly criticized the organization's decision-making. She defended her head coach after the Portland incident and described the sideline exchange as a routine competitive moment. The player herself is not the source of the instability surrounding this team. She is its most significant asset, and a substantial portion of the current unrest stems from the perception, reinforced by documented events, that the Fever have not consistently operated as if they fully understood that. When a franchise player generates this volume of external attention, every internal decision gets magnified. A late injury scratch becomes evidence of mismanagement. A credential revocation becomes evidence of information suppression. A sideline confrontation becomes evidence of a fractured relationship between player and coach. Some of those interpretations extend well beyond what the documented facts support. Others are grounded in a real and observable pattern of inconsistent communication that the organization has not yet corrected with the directness the situation requires. Clark has managed her back throughout the early portion of the 2026 season and has characterized the issue as the routine physical reality of a compressed schedule rather than a serious ongoing concern. She has continued to perform at an elite level in the games she has played. The concern, both for Clark personally and for a franchise with legitimate title ambitions, is whether the organizational environment surrounding her is structured to protect and maximize that production over the full duration of a long season. A franchise does not lose its best player in a single transaction. It loses her through the gradual accumulation of institutional failures that eventually become significant enough to alter the calculus of her future. Whether the Indiana Fever are approaching that threshold is not a question that can be answered definitively from the outside. What can be said, based on the documented record of the first month of the 2026 season, is that the question now exists with a weight and urgency that the organization cannot afford to ignore.
Clark finishes her third professional season under the Fever's contractual control. She has not wavered publicly from her stated commitment to the franchise, but the fans who filled Gainbridge Fieldhouse on the promise of what this roster could become did not come to watch an organization operate reactively, restrict access for journalists who ask difficult questions, and provide inconsistent information about the health of the most important player in the building. They came because Caitlin Clark is the most compelling player in women's basketball, and they expect the people running this franchise to act with the seriousness that demands. The events of the first month of 2026 suggest the Fever still have considerable ground to cover before they consistently meet that standard.